Right. Our main news this morning is, of course, that summit. Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin say they have made progress in peace talks over Ukraine, but no deal so far.
Yeah, the two leaders met for over 2 hours at a military base in Alaska, marking their first face-to-face meeting in 6 years.
Now, President Trump called it very productive. He said there were a couple of big points they agreed on, but then said there's no deal until there's a deal.
We had an extremely productive meeting and many points were agreed to. There are just a very few that are left. Some are not that significant. One is probably the most significant, but we have a very good chance of getting there. We didn't get there, but we have a very good chance of getting there. And we're going to stop really 5, 6, 7,000, thousands of people a week from being killed. And President Putin wants to see that as much as I do. So, again, Mr. President, I'd like to thank you very much, and we'll speak to you very soon and probably see you again very soon.
Yes, and then President Putin said next time in Moscow, and you could have cut the atmosphere with a knife at that point. Earlier on, we spoke to the US political analyst Eric Ham, who branded Donald Trump a president who is treating Vladimir Putin with kid gloves.
We saw an international pariah who is wanted by the International Criminal Court step on U.S. soil, ride in the beast, speak first at a press conference on U.S. soil. And you had the president who came away literally with nothing. Donald Trump treats United States allies and partners far worse than what we saw with Vladimir Putin. Clearly, once again, we saw the kid gloves treatment from this president. Joe Biden met with Vladimir Putin, but he didn't do it on U.S. soil, and he certainly didn't give away the store, and he certainly didn't allow himself to be used as a prop, and he certainly didn't allow himself to be used to buy more time. When Donald Trump talks about this war would have never happened under his watch, he's right. It never would have been a war because he probably would have given Putin all the weapons and all the military hardware he needed to make the war that much easier. In fact, if he could have given military troops, he probably would have done that as well.
Oh, he had his gloves off this morning, did Eric? Well, let's talk to a Trump expert, the author Tim Hames. Morning to you, Tim. What's your assessment of all of this? I mean, Eric Ham there, absolutely scathing about the way this has been handled by Donald Trump. But what's your assessment?
Well, he was more on Eric Hammer than Eric Ham, wasn't he? I think it's a little bit early to tell, to be honest. I think expectations that there would be a sort of pop-up ceasefire deal were always rather excessive, in that right now, a ceasefire is more advantageous to Ukraine than it is to Russia. Russia's on the offense. There are only certain months of the year which constitute a fighting season, if you like, in eastern Ukraine. And a ceasefire would also allow Ukraine time to rearm with more technologically sophisticated weapons than the Russians can muster. So I don't think Putin was ever going to give away a ceasefire unless he had clear sight of what the end deal is going to be. And to that extent, I think Donald Trump is taking a political risk in the appearance that he didn't achieve much in Alaska yesterday. But he's probably trying to think several weeks and months down the road to the point at which it is more in Putin's interests to come to some sort of interim truce and then a broader settlement.
Of course, we don't know what the details are. Maybe they will leak out over the next few days. But President Trump did say that they agreed on a lot of things, but there were some significant things that they couldn't agree on, one particular. What do you reckon that might be?
Well, I think that is the ceasefire proposition, frankly, is the big thing out there. And had that emerged from this meeting, it would have been very hard for even the most severe critics of Donald Trump to say that he had wasted his time in going to Alaska. So I think that's the big one out there. But I think there's a sort of different mindset, if you like, between Russia, the United States and Ukraine on the ceasefire. I think that Vladimir Putin thinks of the ceasefire a bit like in an English house purchase way, where you exchange contracts and lock yourself into completion. That's how he's thinking of it. He's not thinking of it as a virtuous step in and of itself. It's a means to an end. It's a staged deal. And I think Trump understands that. I think Trump probably overestimated the degree that he might have got Putin to indicate that he was, say, 3/4 of the way to a ceasefire or 80% of the way to a ceasefire. I think he may be disappointed that there wasn't any kind of a public acknowledgement of movement. But they will see each other again, but I doubt very much whether it'll be in Moscow.
Using the internet without a VPN, a virtual private network, is a bit like taking to the road without car insurance. All it takes is one unlucky moment to cost you a lot of cash. This video's sponsor is Private Internet Access. They are the VPN to help keep you safe. Click the link in the description below to find out why over 30 million people have downloaded PIA to protect themselves online. A virtual private network is an app that hides your IP address and helps keep your data private. When you're browsing the internet at home, you give up a large amount of data to businesses, to shops, and indeed to social media giants too. Hackers have the ability to steal your personal data with ease, including sensitive information such as passwords, keystrokes, and even your personal photos. Private Internet Access helps protect your personal data by encrypting your internet connection to keep your data out of the hands of cyber criminals. And it's not just hackers either to be concerned about. Information can be censored too. When Canada passed their C-18 bill, social media giants decided to ban news content on their platforms. But PIA can protect your ability to consume the news and content you love. Private Internet Access is available for Windows users, Mac OS, Android, Linux, iOS, and you can use one PIA subscription to protect an unlimited amount of devices. And we've got a huge GB News discount for you too. Click the link in this video's description and you'll get a massive 83% off PIA. That's under £2 a month, the price of a coffee, and you'll get an extra 4 months completely free on top. Also, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee too. Visit piavpn.com/GBnews to start protecting yourself digitally today.
Yeah. What do you make of what President Putin had to say in that we've got no clear answers from this? You know, significant sticking points, significant areas of progress, apparently, but we don't know what any of them are, actually. And then President Putin issued this warning to Kyiv and to Europe, no backroom deals, do not do anything which is going to stall this emerging progress. What progress?
Well, I suspect in the next few weeks we will see relatively symbolic steps such as an exchange of prisoners of war. I think you'll probably see the Russians dialing down drone attacks on civilian targets outside of the main fighting zone. I think you may see some movement on this whole question of children who've disappeared across the border. So there are quite a lot of small and symbolic things that can be done in the interim, and I think they will need to be done in order for the Trump White House to feel that a second in-person meeting is justified.
What would you read into the fact that this was hailed as a summit meeting that might last 6 or 7 hours, and that when the two men did emerge, only 2.5 hours or so later, they didn't take any questions from the press, and I thought they both looked a bit downbeat. What do you make of any of that mood music?
I certainly don't think it was in Donald Trump's interest to spend 6 hours not getting a ceasefire. I mean, if it became fairly clear from the dialogue that there was going to be no rabbit out of the hat in that sense, then it was a rational use of his time to cut it relatively short and therefore leave Putin with an element of doubt as to whether or not he's going to get a second face-to-face meeting without putting something on the table in advance. And I think he will need to put something on the table in advance if they're going to meet in either Reykjavik or Riyadh, both of which I think are more likely destination than Moscow.
A lot of this is about optics at this stage. We know that, whether we like it or not. Who do you think won on the battle of optics?
On day one, i.e. this morning, if the Putin spin doctors will probably be happier than the White House ones. There's no question about that, because he got to meet the president on US soil, he got to ride in his car, he got to be treated as an equal. It was as if all that has happened in the last 3 years had never happened. So in the very short term, you obviously chalk that one up to Putin. But at the end of the day, what Trump is playing is a slightly longer game than that. Trump is assuming that Putin, and especially the Russian political elites, who can't travel properly, whose children can't travel properly, who've got assets frozen all over Europe. And that's where Europe is an important player. Most of the Russian assets that are currently frozen aren't in the United States. They're in the continent of Europe. So Trump is taking the punt that Putin ultimately wants a deal.
OK. Tim Hames, really good to talk to you. Thank you.
And Peter Barnes is still with us in... Thank you very much. Peter Barnes is still with us in the studio. When you look at those two men together walking down the red carpet away from their planes and getting in the big beast...
Yes.
Who is the more powerful leader?
Well, I have to admit, for me, it's Putin, because Putin got parity. He got to a meeting with the US president. He got to stand side by side next to him. He got back in the room, and that's what Russia hasn't been for a very long time. This is the first time Putin's been on US soil in over 10 years. It's a big moment for Russia being less isolated in the world. This is now, he's back, it like legitimized Putin. This is what the big controversy about this entire summit was this really putting Putin under pressure, or was it handing legitimacy on a silver platter? And unfortunately, it's looking very likely that it's the latter, because as you say, there was no deal on the ceasefire, no deal on missile use, no demilitarization, no de-escalation of any variety was achieved out of this meeting in any public sense. So, as we say, that there's great moments of a kind of progress, but we don't know what those were, because nothing was ever given to us. Nothing was given to the public. Because if anything was achieved, you could bet your bottom dollar the White House would have been all over it in terms of a press release and all the rest of it.
And yet, isn't there an argument to say? And I totally get what you're saying about Putin being back on the world stage, and that's important to him. But isn't there something to say about him? The more you isolate him and keep him behind bars, as it were, the more dangerous he can become.
Well, I completely agree with you, and this has been one of my big criticisms of the way the world has treated Putin and Russia, is that kind of keeping him as the kind of pariah has only ever enabled him. But unfortunately, he's just wandered into Ukraine, and the world just kind of went okay. So unfortunately, I don't really know what else you can really do. I think Trump's plan is to kind of like give him that kind of parity is controversial, and it is very dangerous. But it's all about, can Trump then now negotiate and actually build on that relationship that he thinks he's got with Putin to get something out of him? Because at the moment, Putin's not giving ground on anything, really. But yet Trump seems to have conceded quite significantly.
I thought it was significant as well that Donald Trump has recently thrown things open to the journalists in front of him and gone on for hours sometimes, fielding every single question. But this time, clearly, the two men had said no, they weren't going to speak to journalists. And in fact, if you look at this, this is the moment when a rather confused-looking President Putin was shouted at by the journalists.
Press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Let's go. Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Thank you, press. Let's go. Come on, guys. Come on.
Yeah, he's certainly not used to that sort of behaviour.
Oh, absolutely not. But let's not forget, Putin brought quite the delegation with him. There was a couple of hundred journalists that he's brought with him. This was a big moment for Putin to be able to be back on the world stage. And there he is, he stood next to the US president. Now, I did find it quite funny, the size difference of the podium behind the podiums. Again, all this stuff is choreographed with an nth degree. But it is the lack of substance and the red carpet welcome that will only fuel the Trump critics, I'm afraid.
So now that Trump is back on his way back home, he will be discussing with his advisors, what do we tell the press? What do we tell the world that we did achieve? How does he do that? In other words, sort of save his face to a certain extent. How does he do that without really jeopardising the meetings thus far and the meetings he hopes will happen next?
What he's got to do really from a kind of long-term strategy point of view is actually make this kind of step one. So basically what he's got to kind of now convince the world is he made Putin come to him. So if you'd have asked many of us about a year ago, would any of this likely have happened? No. Most of us would have said there was no way Putin was ever going to agree to anything. Now, he didn't just send a delegation, he came himself. That is a huge turning point in this conflict in a very short amount of time. So, there is ways for the White House to be able to spin this. It's got to kind of make it is a step towards, but that's why, if you notice, it is pursuing peace. It's not that peace will be achieved. Language and the framing of this is actually quite on point, but it doesn't surprise because Trump is a PR guy at the end of the day.
Did you think that that Putin was making it almost a condition of another meeting that it happen in Moscow?
Without a shadow of a doubt. This is now watch Putin, I'm back in charge, because a lot of the world has always said that Putin was, playing like 4D chess and all the rest of it, but he's been a step ahead of the world for a very long time. He knows this game. He's an ex-KGB. He knows how to play the optics. He knows how to play these backers. It was very interesting that Trump said no to a one-on-one, because that was one of the big Putin's great tactics. He's always flattery, one-on-one meeting. Then it looked like Trump has somehow conceded behind closed doors and all the rest of it. And Trump was smart to say no to that, and I think that may have thrown Putin a little bit. But
and for anyone who's just woken up and hasn't seen the whole thing, this moment when President Trump said, right, we'll meet again soon, and Putin came back and said, in Moscow, and then you could have cut the atmosphere with a knife. Let's have a little look at that.
Again, Mr. President, I'd like to thank you very much, and we'll speak to you very soon and probably see you again very soon. Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I could see it possibly happening.
Yeah,
I could see it possibly happening.
Yeah, I have to admit, you can feel everybody kind of shift uncomfortably in the seats over that one. But a lot of critics are now saying, was this the Chamberlain moment? Was this the peace in our time situation that we've now seen? And a lot of, again, we don't know because we haven't got the details. But from an optics point of view, this was Putin's win.
Yeah, interesting. I tell you what, I just found interesting on a personal level is it's not often we hear Vladimir Putin's voice.
That's very true. It's also rare for him to speak English.
Yeah.
Very, very rare. Again, won't be an accident. All of that will have been planned beforehand because, like I said, Putin doesn't do anything by accident.
I also thought he looked older than his glamour photographs would have.
I've been saying this for a long time, actually. That I saw a picture of him just a couple of days ago and I was like, hasn't he aged? Quite a lot in a very short amount of time as well.
Well, it's just time for a retouch.
Yeah.
Isn't it?